Hello, 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 and welcome back to another episode of Choose with the News. I'm Jack,
I'm Eli.
and honestly, we got a fantastic episode. I
It's
think,
amazing.
I think in my opinion, this is probably my favorite episode we've done.
hmm
But like, obviously, I could be wrong. There are a lot of episodes I'm proud of, but I think I might be the most proud of this one.
Absolutely. It's a long one. You can see how long it is, but it's good. And you know,
Right,
at the very least, jump around if you don't want to listen all the way through. But
right.
we're very
So
proud of this.
today is Saturday, January 9th. If you guys have seen, we posted stuff on our story saying like if you want to talk, um, you're more than welcome to. We just want to hear what you have to say, kind of just give people a chance to vent. We thought it would be an interesting idea. So we've the last couple days, last from Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, we've recorded a couple of different people coming on and just sharing their thoughts and their opinions about like this last year, but like mainly on like what happened, a couple of days ago. So that's kind of like what this episode is. It's just people giving a chance to like say like what they're getting out of, like these difficult times right now and, their thoughts and how they're feeling.
Yeah, exactly. So we spent a long time, close to 6 months, talking about and sharing our opinions. And so we thought it'd be a great opportunity to listen to our community's opinions. And as they talk about their take on current events, express their emotions, exactly what Jack said.
So I hope everybody enjoys. And yeah, well, we have a fantastic guest joining us right now. You may recognize her because she's been on an episode. If you're an OG listener to the podcast, good for you guys, but you will maybe recognize her. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody. I am so excited to be back on Jews with the News. My name is Cassie Beisheim, and I am actually Jack and Eli's best friend. So it's a pretty big deal that I'm here.
Very, very. Okay, so I guess we'll just open the floor to you. You're welcome to speak what's on your mind, any thoughts, any feelings. Go for it.
So, with specifically what's been happening today, I think the thing at the forefront of my mind is the fact that, in my eyes, people being surprised by what happened today is frankly surprising to me. Because at the end of the day, I think that what happened today is a perfect example of exactly how fascism functions in our society, how white supremacy upholds everything in our society, and how there is such a lack of humanity and education among so many people in our country that like these types of things are bound to happen. It's not surprising to me. I saw this one tweet today that I thought was really funny. That said, it was something like, "You guys are so surprised seeing the police not doing anything about these protests, but y'all don't get confused when you don't see Miley and Hannah in the same room." And I was like,
Right.
exactly. And I know that there's been similar tweets, about when the BLM movement was going on. And I think it's just really crucial to understand that like it's really hard to grasp this idea that these systems are inherently bad. Like it's the same thing with um uh I think there was like a similar tweet about during like the BLM movement, like when it was really at its peak in June, about like the reason why you don't see police officers shutting down KKK rallies is the same reason you don't see Miley and Hannah in the same room. Like these systems of oppression all function together. I don't know if I'm explaining this well with tying it in specifically to what happened at the Capitol, but I just think that that is what's at the forefront of my mind is an understanding that I feel like a lot of Americans don't have about what this really means, and that it's not really a shock.
Yeah. Uh, so maybe to go like one step further, right? So we've seen, right, Senator Josh Hawley, President Trump basically inciting this violence, right? And they were kind of speaking, right, in tones that almost promoted,
Yeah.
the communities to go. But you're also saying, which I think correctly, that this was bound to happen, just systematically, right? So like regardless of rhetoric, this was bound to happen at some point in our country's history, and this rhetoric kind of sped it up until today. Is that kind of correct?
Yeah, I definitely would say that that's the point that I'm getting at. And I think that, yeah, what I'm trying to say is that it was bound to happen for sure. And that's because of how our society just inherently functions. And like, it's just so clear. And I like all, as I said earlier, the comparisons of what happened during Black Lives Matter protests and riots, which in my opinion were justified, but they were being shamed by lots of people, mostly white people, um, and taken down. I have several friends who were like tear gassed and physically harmed. And then like, yeah, there was a little of that going on here, but to be frank, it was performative and like it was ridiculous, but it's not surprising.
Now, as tumultuous of an event that this was,
Mhm.
and how widespread, and how there have been a lot of people giving their opinions on it, whether that be uh, like obviously the media, politicians, other foreign officials. Do you think that this is like a wake up call to America to see how like bad these systems really are? Or do you think this is just a product of it and nothing's going to change?
See, what I think is tricky about America in general is that we sensationalize events in the same way that we did the Black Lives Matter movement, but we're also really good at letting those events go, which is on purpose. That's, as I said, like this is all part of the system. We are supposed to be desensitized to these awful things because we're supposed to believe there's no alternative. Like that is really the most major part of all this, is that we're supposed to believe like, okay, well, all we can do is vote these Democrats into office, which we did. So like, yay us, look at these crazy people. Okay, move on to the next fucking horrible, I don't know if I can swear, sorry, world event.
It's
Um
fine. I mean, it's not like we're making money off this, so
That's true. Not kid friendly. But like the next horrible world event, the next thing that is a historical event that is just being crammed into smaller and smaller periods of time. So to answer your question, I wish that this could be a wake-up call, but I think that our system is designed to make people steer in the wrong direction. As I was saying with like the whole idea of like voting people into office being the solution and new legislation being the solution, when in reality like there's so much that needs to be done changing the mindsets of Americans to make actual change, that like an event like this isn't necessarily going to steer things off their already inevitable course, in my opinion.
I want to talk about kind of the irony that's occurring here and kind of your thoughts on this. So the people that were literally trying to break into the U.S. Capitol and stop these, constitutional procedures from taking place are the same people who, just months ago were yelling that we need to uphold, right, so many of these structures, that, the Constitution and these laws are, crucial to how society functions. And so I kind of want to get your take on what that means for that group of people, and also what it means for the group of people that are now saying uphold these institutions, and before we're saying we need change.
Yeah. I think that that irony is also another thing that I think is so common. And I think that it's comedic to me how both political parties in the United States love to call each other out for hypocrisy, um, when in reality it's you're gonna do whatever's convenient for your own benefit. It's the same problem with that like is overarching with the issues of capitalism and how our country functions. It's always going to be about benefiting people on the top, and those people on the top are going to tell you, hey, you got to do anything that you can to benefit our party so that I can stay doing great. And that's where the hypocrisy comes from, in my opinion. I think that's why they're willing to skew things their way no matter what, because they've been brainwashed very well. That's how it all works, in my personal opinion.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. This has been a great conversation. I'm glad you were able to share your thoughts and your feelings and your opinions.
Of course, I've got plenty of those.
Yeah.
Well, we got another great guest coming on again. This may be our second time trying this, but we make do. It's another fresh face. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Eli. I'm Owen. I am a freshman as well at Illinois. I met Jack as he's actually my neighbor, right down the hall. So I met him on the first few days and quickly after found out about Jews with the News as a podcast and started listening. But in general, I try to stay very active and focused on what's happening, with politics and society. And the past few days have definitely been a big kind of, I wouldn't say advancement, more like a devolvement of events, but definite history like made right before our eyes. So I have a few things I think that, struck me off guard or caught me off guard and really made me think about redefining what my own understandings of our government and its capabilities are, as well as where I stand politically with everything, because there was obviously a lot of political chaos that I don't agree with, but even my kind of most fundamental beliefs were challenged. And I think it'll be interesting to talk about that.
Yeah, it's going to be a great conversation. I mean, we could just open the floor to you. You could just,
Well, sure. Yeah.
say what you want, and we'll have
Should
a
we
great
summarize?
conversation.
Should we summarize sort of just to catch up, or is it pretty clear that, what we're talking about today is the Capitol insurrection?
Well, there you go. I think most people know about it. So it's,
Yeah.
now that
So
they know,
in
that's what we're
in
covering.
case you were in the coma meme for the last 5 years, Donald Trump became president, and as president, he did pretty much everything unexpected of him. And as one final act, now that Joe Biden has been kind of elected as 46th presidential elect, there was this march on Washington for Trump, like a loser day parade or whatnot. And during this march, from what I understand, he tells his supporters to go to the Capitol, and they go there in hordes. And as someone who also likes watching a lot of movies and likes talking a lot about sci-fi and, dystopian novels, I was a big dystopian novel guy. Seeing it play out live is not something I wanted. Not some I thought I did, but not something I wanted, especially not in like this kind of close to an election and this close off of what was a pretty terrible year. So yeah, I guess the biggest thing that caught me off guard about the Capitol insurrection is just how easily it happened. These people were not planned out, they were not organized. Unlike a lot of the peaceful protests we saw this summer, and even when some of those protests started becoming violent and when there were clashes breaking out at them, there were plans for how to fix it or solve it or de-escalate it. And seeing the lack of that really made it clear both that I don't think there was a real political message behind this, aside from we're upset and we're going to listen to Trump. And that was shocking when this got further than any protest this summer did, or any conception I had in my head of what a protest could do, as this turned from a protest to a riot to literally, trespassing and breaking and entering into the Capitol building, our nation's government. So, I was just as shocked as everybody else to see that. But, clearing that up, I want to first hear kind of what you guys and some others have said about it so far, and sort of understand what the general consensus is.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this was something that was shocking to see, while at the same time almost like not surprising. Like I don't really know how to frame it. One of our previous guests, Cassie, kind of said it better, but I think what I'm trying to say, I think for me, what it was just seeing the blatant irony, both from the people who were trying to break into the Capitol building and from the politicians reacting to that. Right, there was a lot of irony going on when, you know, the people breaking in were, you know, a lot of those people 4 months earlier were saying, like, you know, we support law enforcement, and, you know, we have to do everything we can to obey the laws and regulations. And there was also a lot of irony going on the political side, right? A lot of Democrats who were speaking out about things like defunding the police, and, you know, even some more radical ideas were, you know, tweeting out messages, you know, like, we have to obey law enforcement now. So I think there was a lot of irony, that kind of came about this week, that for me just kind of showed the kind of uncovered kind of the facade and the fakeness that kind of embodies DC right now.
Facade is definitely a good word for it, because it felt like, you know, we have this huge, you know, body of government, this bureaucracy that's withstood many wars, you know, withstood attacks and sieges, and has this impenetrable wall of defense. But really, it just was guards opening up the gates for these people and letting them in. So it really was like a veneer there. It was one door in the way, no locks, no anything, and they were able to get into all of these like representatives' rooms, vandalize. Uh, Heaven knows what, you know, they got or were able to find with all of these unlocked doors, unlocked cabinets, and whatnot. But yeah, it really did kind of expose a lot of, I guess, rot in the frame.
Well, I could go on and on and on about, you know, a lot of different things that, you know, kind of showed after this event took place. I mean, there are a lot of angles you could approach this from. There's a lot of, you know, systems that were exposed, just whole like ideologies that kind of just, you know, were also exposed. I think the main point that I want to bring across is that, like, this was inevitable, at least in my opinion. I didn't know to what extent like this would happen, but I knew something like this was gonna
Sort of
happen.
like, sort of like how Eli said it was kind of surprising, but he's not surprised about it.
Right.
No.
I'm more surprised that, you know, they kind of just went for it. I was expecting, like, when this eventually happened, that there would be more of like an organized, but, you know, they were just like, okay, we're gonna go to the Capitol. Oh, okay, now we're in. Oh my God, we're in. And then they just did that. It's just odd. And
It's
I think,
surreal, yeah.
right, I think the term that I use is like shell shock. It's just like, I'm kind of speechless. Like, I just didn't expect this to happen. But if 4 years have gone by where countless officials, elected representatives, people put in place have been enabling this type of mentality for 4 years now. And eventually, if you're getting fed these many lies, and you're told that somebody is stealing something from you, and you are told to fight back, like, eventually something like this is going to happen, which is also kind of, you know, an issue, considering if you look at, I hate to do this, but like, kind of like what happened in Germany, with Hitler's come to power. Like, this is just fascism at work.
Well, I think that's a good point. I think that, well, aside from the fact that, you know, an Illinois congresswoman nearly elected literally quoted Hitler in this rally before it, I think there are a lot of tells to that same both kind of framework of fascism, or these like points of fascism coming across, where it's whether or not it's turning on, you know, previous points you had in your politics like, Blue Lives Matter, Law and Order, how that they quickly threw that out the window, or whether or not it's that hate and anger building up, and then also probably the lack of organization beyond that, like anger and hatred. So I think that's not too far off there, and especially since Nazi Germany was one recent example, or in modern day history, of an attempted coup. I actually learned how there was a first coup several years before the rise to power as well.
1923, yeah.
So not not trying to compare directly here because they're different situations, but like if history repeats itself and history tells us things, it's that one single event, especially now that we're seeing kind of the immediate repercussions of this event, isn't going to totally dissolve the problem. And I think that's the big thing I want to talk about here, is the problem behind this, because this is clearly white supremacy and domestic terrorism in action here. And this is not, I don't think, a political message. This is not some sort of belief mindset difference. This just straight up appears to me to be an attack on our democracy, an attack on our elected officials, and an attack on our freedoms. And I think the irony in that, because there's just so much irony to this, if it wasn't so sad, it would be almost ridiculous, SNL sketch. But the irony in it is that these people are calling themselves patriots, waving a Confederate flag around in the Capitol building. This is so clearly the furthest thing away from what our country stands for. And to clearly establish that this is an attack on the US.
Yeah.
Now,
Go ahead, Jack.
I was just gonna kind of transition. So if you still had something.
No, go ahead. I was gonna
Okay.
also transition.
So you mentioned like the repercussions that are kind of starting to take place. By the way, we're recording this on Friday, which I can't remember what day it happened. It happened
I
Wednesday.
think today's the 8th.
Yeah,
because
so it happened
it
on
was
the
on the
6th.
6th.
Yeah, so it happened Wednesday. So slowly but surely we're starting to see, some repercussions happen after the event. Like obviously we won't get to the full extent until we can view this from like a historical context 20 years in the future.
But 48 hours out, oh shit, there are repercussions.
It's one way to put it. Would you like to give your thoughts and opinions on anything that's happening?
Absolutely. I think, well, the most immediate repercussion is how little action was taken by law enforcement. There were 13 arrests or 20 arrests the first day of the coup, whereas daily, I believe, during the Black Lives Matter protest, there was over 1,000. With after George Floyd's death, there were over 1,000 arrests a day. So the disparity between the authorities' approach to this is very clear here. But even bigger than that is the fact that it was very clear. Well, it was good that there was a kind of, thankfully, a joint effort by Congress to go through and approve the Electoral College results. Now with, clearly less PR in favor of trying to argue these results because they didn't really have any case to stand on. And now associating themselves with the domestic terrorists didn't seem to be a good idea. So I'm not surprised that the Electoral College results went through. But what did surprise me is how quickly they've kind of given up on seemingly this Congress or this administration. Both the House and the Senate have both called off, I believe, future sittings until the new president has been elected. But even more so, it seemed that an entire part of the Republican Party itself either quickly got like disassociated itself with, I believe it was the 7 congressmen who all submitted complaints against the Electoral College, or have just straight up been silent about this and not held accountable in the same way that so many Democrats were, and so many, especially progressives, were, during earlier protests. So the disparity between the initial reactions have been very severe and very eye-opening to me, because it's not like we want them to have to face the same racism, anger, unfair justice treatment, and mass arrests and police brutality as what happened with Black Lives Matter. But the fact that, there's none of that, they get the far right terrorists are getting, almost hand holding, as literally someone got held hands down the stairs of the Capitol building. They're just getting seemingly off easy. And to me, that's made me realize that, well, one, it doesn't seem to be as unorganized, at least from an administrative or an ideological standpoint, as it seemed. And or two, the fact that, these people just can operate and have operated in such a way where they just do not care or do not have to worry about repercussions of the actions. We're seeing now on Twitter all of these people who, all these terrorists who wandered into the building and broke a bunch of things and fought yards are now getting arrested and showing clear remorse for it, but surprised to, as if they didn't understand it was going to be a large penalty, even enacted under Trump, to go and deface monuments and to break into buildings. And ironically enough, all because, he tried to lock down on Black Lives Matter. And it's really ridiculous to me, just the fact that now so many different politicians are looking anywhere but the obvious that is holding these people accountable. And number one, that means holding Trump accountable, but also it means holding all of the congressmen, Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley, and even, the different departments in the cabinet accountable. 3 different cabinet members have resigned without, invoking anything near the 25th Amendment or doing their duties, because I don't think it's a good idea to resign only to save your own ass. And that's what we're seeing here. So for me, at least, the congressional approach to this has just been pure selfishness, or just continued down the same ideological lines regardless of party. The only progress we've really been seeing is that the Democrats have moved quickly to write up articles of impeachment, and those are going to be emergency voted on Monday. But aside from that, it seemed like there was a real desire, especially from so many kind of elites in Congress, to just move on, whether that be by not going into Congress and having to deal with it and just wait till the next administration, or by quite literally blaming Antifa. And we just know that both of those are ridiculous things. And the fact that they're given legitimacy, I think, just shows the issue once again.
Right. I agree. Like, all these people are saying, like, oh, we're condemning, these actions, and we never, like, incited violence. And I'm sitting here like, they are so lucky that, like, these politicians who are, saying they're resigning or making these statements saying they don't approve of the actions, they're so lucky how, what's the word? How bad America's memory is. It's like we only focus on things, for a short period and then just forget about them. Like, I think a lot of people just, like, don't remember that the first impeachment happened early in 2020 because of everything that happened after. So it's kind of like, now that this has happened,
yeah.
right, now that this has happened, people are forgetting that for the last 4 years, people like Senator McConnell, and who's now, like, condemning Trump and saying, like, he's in the wrong or whatever, enabled him for the last 4 years. And the fact that he's able to get away with this is the exact issue, is what I was trying to bring up earlier. It's just like, you put yourself in a system where, you continue until it's convenient for you to back out. And at that point, you're just like, oh, it wasn't me ever. And you just, like, completely get away scotch-free with, putting us, the actual people, at a disadvantage. And it's kind of like with the resignations, it's like, for example, Betsy DeVos said that, like, she disapproves of Trump's actions and him inciting violence. That's why she's stepping down. But if you really disapproved, instead of just saving your own ass, you would try to get something to happen or stay in so we can't put in somebody else who would further incite this violence. Like, you could instigate the proper rules to, start the 25th Amendment. Like, that's something that you could do to actually make yourself look like you actually cared, but in reality you don't. And
For sure.
politicians are scumbags. That's my point.
Again and again. Yeah, and I think another same way we see about this saving your own ass is, and I think this is another core like principle of fascism, where it's, do everything you can to just survive yourself, whether that means abandoning your principles or your group entirely, or even eating your own. Like, another thing that really struck me is how these maggots were just completely, gone from pro-Trump to anti-Pence as soon as Pence said he would certify the electoral college results. And it really, because Pence is entirely complicit with Trump as well. He just did what he was expected to and legally required to. And by doing that, they don't care about the law. The terrorists don't care about, the party he was in or what he did in the past. There's no accountability held to him then, but for the wrong reasons, because now they're saying kill him because he did what he had, or he didn't do what he couldn't do constitutionally, which was to say, oh, I have the power to overturn this election. So it really goes just entirely to show that this is a real issue we have, where people are so focused on a singular thing, which is power, or keeping their politician in power, that they're willing to make everybody lose just so that they can watch their opponents lose, I guess. And we've been seeing this for a long time with, healthcare or the economy or even education and all of these different policies in Congress. But this is quite literally what happened when they insisted that we need a fair election, and we need a fair election as they're trying to overturn a fair election and install what there would be a dictator. So it really blows my mind just how right we've moved, and kind of been forced to move, even because, so many of the Congress people are stuck, held accountable to the system, which to them is binding, and they cannot, break out of it, whether it's filibustering something or trying to lead a prayer on the floor and getting arrested several years ago, like Raphael Warnock was, and the just the utter ridiculousness that politicians can be held so strictly to something, but then at the same time, all of that can be overturned by a crowd of angry Trump supporters. It really just shows where the kind of ball is in the court, and it's way further right than anything, democracy should be in. And seeing from that and seeing the responses to that, I think is the most polarizing event of these last 4 years, at least, because in terms of the people around me, it's making very clear, if you are okay with this, you are okay with fascism, or you are okay with the overturning of a fair election, and you are okay with an insurrection, and pointing clear. And a lot of people are afraid to admit that, but they're showing their support by it, by not disapproving of it and not making it so easily clear that this is wrong. And so to both, reiterate that it's wrong, but also to talk out against these people and point them out, it's all I've been kind of engaging with recently. But it's also ridiculous that I have to stoop to this level, or that we have to stoop to this level as educated young Americans and as people in a society, but also just as kind of victims to watching this, all of us. So
Yeah, I think that's really astute. I kind of want to talk about, because we've talked a lot about kind of the similarities between this and, Nazi Germany. We've talked a lot about all these, horrible repercussions of what's happened over the last, 3 days. But there's also been some incredibly good things that have happened in the last 3 days, which are,
yeah,
right, we've had the first Black senator and the first Jewish senator elected to the state of Georgia, right? My Congresswoman Cori Bush announced that her first act in Congress will be to expel, or put in a resolution to expel, the people from Congress who were instigating these riots. And so I'm not saying that solving the state of our democracy is by any means easy or doable. And I don't think Joe Biden is the best person to lead that, attempt. But my question, I guess, is do you think we should be hopeful, or is now a time to kind of hunker down and stay a little pessimistic?
Well, I love kind of the positivity of that question, because I think positivity is the only way out of situations like these, especially, as we kind of reach a breaking point, quote unquote, with so many frontiers. I think even the smallest victories are ones we should celebrate. But I do think there's hope in the future. And I think well, number one, there's hope in the fact that Joe Biden will become president and that Congress will go entirely blue and become a lot more as needed liberal. But I also think that, like you said, with Reverend Warnock and John Ossoff, these little victories are ones clearly worth celebrating. In the fact that a widespread voter registration on the part of the wonderful Stacey Abrams, and then these bills immediately being introduced into Congress from the likes of Congresswoman Bush and Omar and all of these progressives, and then just being co-sponsored by pretty much I've seen all Democrats and even some across the aisle in the House and the Senate. So I do think the fact that even though so many Republicans are jumping ship and trying to act like they were never a part of this, I think the fact that it's clear that there's uncomfortability in the current situation all around means that there's going to be some sort of progress made. Now, I think that it would not be best for our country to get too boggled down in this and try to sort out all of these events, try to arrest all of these people and bring the harshest penalties to any of them. Because as we saw on our side with BLM protests and with so many of the fights for civil rights, it's not worth fighting over singular issues, especially when, there's so much bigger fundamental issues involving them and involving kind of what we're facing nowadays. So yes, I think that while I can really hope that the Justice Department is going to have a field day with all of these criminals leaving office on the 21st, we do have a lot to look forward to. And that's why the night of the Georgia runoff, it was relief, just relief online and relief in person. There was definitely celebrations in my family, seeing that Georgia stayed blue and has flipped blue and looks blue for the foreseeable future. I think that we're seeing that in states like Texas as well, and even Arizona, that are becoming a lot more blue. So politically speaking, at elections, I think there is progress to be made in the fact that more people are voting, more people are being educated on these topics and focused on what not only benefits them, but what benefits their community and what benefits the people around them. And I do think that in some way, with the youth vote especially, we're seeing that it's not as selfish as it once was, or it's not as hateful or decisive or divisive as the media might portray it, when people can understand that they have an opportunity to help people and improve society. And while with issues like kind of racial injustice or police brutality or economic injustice and just real two-sided issues, that might take longer to see these gains as it's slowly inch by inch, bill by bill kind of playing out. But in terms of things that are more existential crises, like our globalization as a whole, or climate change in particular, or what it means for our military or whatnot, I think that where we've only really had the problems from either corporations or our government running wild without any backlash, such as being able to just buy so many nukes and buy so many military weapons, or put all of our subsidies into oil and fossil fuels and pollute the environment. I think that once people start waking up to some of these social injustices, that we're going to see both socially but also economically, because the economy is what controls America. we're going to see some of these changes play out. So I'm really hopeful, more hopeful than I have been in the past few years, due to this election, but also due to what the people have done out of it. So I'm feeling more positive as a whole, even though there's still really big kind of worries I have about police brutality and white supremacy on the rise in America. But I think that no matter what happens, as long as we encourage people to vote and use their voices, that the majority of the Americans are on the side fighting for more equality and better policies. And at this point, we'll just have to see how that plays out in Congress, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that is, well said.
Thank you.
Any hopefulness that we could get right now is always good in especially after the last year, which is just kind of, a year that, most people want to forget. It's good to be able to take some optimism from everything that's going on. So, it's very admirable.
Yes. And just one other thing, I think the fact that I don't think that the coronavirus can be discounted at all in this. A lot of these people out there really seemed, and the discussions about personal freedoms have all sort of grown due to the pandemic, and this feeling that wanting to be the victim and wanting to feel like you're being oppressed, coming from the right wing, who has not been oppressed and has not been the victim of anything and is now confusing that with having to wear a mask. It's going to be interesting to see how the widespread distribution of vaccines and the ultimate end of the pandemic will not return things, say, to previous state, because I do think that we're going to be seeing a lot of changes and kind of our landscape, and that would be something I would love to talk about at another time as well. But I think that in terms of socially or culturally, America is going to be less agitated due to the end of the pandemic, and that I think going forward are two, or at least on my end, what I think would be healthiest, kind of re-entering a society of outside of this tragic pandemic, would be to have patience and listen to what's been the people's biggest concerns, because I am lucky enough as a white male where my biggest concern is being inside and staying home and having to take classes online and staying motivated on that, or staying sane in the sense that, oh, I want to go outside and not give into that. But there are people out there who do not have the option to stay safe and are fighting for their survival. And so when we come out of this pandemic, it's going to be really, I think, friction, when some people are coming out of this looking forward to partying and moving on like there's nothing, whereas some people are still as much, their fundamental issues are still as much there. And I think that's really our fundamental issues then. So I definitely think we need to be wary as a society and as individuals of recognizing everybody's different experiences in this past year, but more so everybody's needs going forward into the future, if we want any sake of restoring a more unified but also more progressive country.
Very well said. Thank you so much for joining.
Well, thank you.
We really enjoyed having you here.
Yes,
Uh,
thank you very much.
Well, thanks again. Yeah, this was a lot of fun, and I really liked the way you guys kind of conducted this, and I look forward to listening to the podcast and what everyone else has to say. But also, just going forward, I think this issue is going to be one that plays out for a while in different ways. So it'll be very interesting to see. I know just today Trump's Twitter account got suspended, and now, of course, there's uproar about what constitutes free speech or censorship or whatnot, and how the next 10 days are going to look with the inauguration and new Congress. But I do think there is that hope, like you were saying, Eli, on the horizon, and it's one we should definitely keep paying attention to, because there's opportunity for great change here.
Yeah.
Yes, and we will look
Definitely.
forward to talking with you about that, hopefully in a later episode as well.
Oh yes, yeah, I would love to do that. So, all right. Uh, thank you guys for having me, and I'm gonna get going now. But stay safe, stay well, and
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah.
thanks. We have another great guest joining us. You may recognize him from the way he eats his pizza so abnormally that it's almost disgusting. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Well, I'd first like to say the way that I eat pizza is completely normal. And yeah, my name is Ayush. I'm sure most of you know me. I graduated in 2020 along with Jack and Eli, and I'm glad to be here.
Great.
And
We're
let me just expand a little bit about how I eat pizza. I think that's super important before we really get into discussion. The way I eat
Alright,
pizza
we'll do
is
this
a
again.
little bit off the end of it, right? And then a little bit of the crust, right? Because like I don't want to leave the crust just for the end. So then I eventually eat it until I basically have a bite of crust with every single bite at the end. So it's like a balanced mix of just cheese and part of the crust. You know?
No.
Like you don't
no.
want just crust or just
anyways.
Everyone wants just crust.
Anyways, we
That's
brought
just a
you on.
breadstick.
We brought you on to speak about whatever the heck you want to speak about. We're gonna give you the floor. Just say your thoughts, opinions, feelings about anything that's happened in the last year or yesterday. Yeah, it's your turn now.
Yeah. Well, I'm personally going to be talking a little bit about just the whole Trump drama in general and how that's really impacted the state of America and what we believe in our democratic institutions and how we can kind of move forward. So I feel Trump's actions recently have really, really showed that he has no blatant respect for our democracy. It was founded after like 2016. Well, it was found after the 2016 election that like Russia blatantly intervened in our election. And there have been multiple people, multiple staff members, and even like his relatives who have blatantly come out and said that, hey, he has contacted other world leaders to intervene in the 2020 election on his favor. Point in case, China, Turkey, all these individuals where he acts like he doesn't have respect for them, but on the side, he like begs them to work for him and work with him to get him reelected. So like in the case of like soybeans, he increased like international tariffs on them, meaning that we were going to increase the domestic growth of soybeans instead of buying them from China. But on the side, he promised them saying that, hey, we'll lower the tariffs way later as long as you can promise us like some support in the election, thus meaning voter like fraud and intervention there, right? It's like events like these that were already laying out the foundation of Trump's actions, I feel. And he's really just had no respect for the entire process. And I think the Georgia phone call that happened the other day with the Secretary of State there really just lays it all down fully at the end of the day. I need like 11,870 votes or something like that. I don't know the exact number, but he needed like a certain amount of votes and he kept mentioning it on the call. Like, I want this many votes. Can you just find them and just say that we just made a counting error? This is actually the results. I mean, that's basically worse than Watergate. Like, you're full on like just saying, give me these votes. Like, find me these votes and give them to me. And I'm like kind of proud of the establishment, at least the Republican establishment, for like standing up to Trump to an extent. But there's also members of the Republican establishment that have been also going against what the American people wanted with like the $2,000 paychecks, like the COVID relief paychecks and stuff like that. So it's just kind of been all over the place. And you see like Trump creating a divide in the Republican Party, but moreover a divide in America, where like case in point, yesterday, where we saw his protesters storm the Capitol, destroy institutions, and threatened the lives of multiple representatives of the United States. Multiple individuals even had to hide and seek refuge in the building because it was unsafe to leave the area. More importantly, I know Mike Pence was still in the Capitol building because they could not get him to the White House to safety. And I think after that whole situation, a lot of members of his party just lost blatant respect for him. There's only a few members of the Republican establishment that are still standing by him, with Josh Hawley, our senator, and Ted Cruz. So like, it's interesting how the entire situation is playing out.
And I would like to ask a question here. It took 4 years for anybody to remotely stand up to him. He was the president, he was the leader of their party. Sure, but what he was doing was clearly wrong, and they allowed it and permitted it. Do you think this will have like any like lasting effects on like the party itself?
I mean, sort of. I mean, you can already see how blatantly different the Republican Party is from the Reagan era and the Bush era compared to the Trump era. Like, even these old presidents don't support President Trump. Like, they're not even voting for him. They're voting for Joe Biden, or just not even casting a ballot, right? And it's just interesting that this entire, disjunction in the Republican Party, I feel, is definitely going to shape their beliefs later on and how people view the Republican Party. I mean, Democrats are going to just hate them a lot more after this whole incident, and they're going to justify a lot of their actions in the future with this. But I feel like after this whole Capitol building incident, we might see a blue wave for a decent bit of time, but there's always a chance where Republicans start to go back to the Reagan era kind of like ways and start to move away from what Trump really established. And that might be more beneficial for the Republican Party because they were extremely successful then in capturing America's support.
So you talked about how there are a few people within the Republican Party, few like members of Congress within the Republican Party that have kind of stuck by Trump, one of whom is our senator, Josh Hawley. Ted Cruz, you said, was another. And kind of the reason why most people kind of suspect is because these people are people who are planning on running for office, either some higher office or re-election. And this kind of seems to be their strategy moving forward, politically speaking. Do you think that this is a good idea? Like, do you think Republicans who stick by Trump will be rewarded down the road politically? Or do you think that the country is kind of shifting, so now even the Republican Party is going to try and stray further and further away from the Trump ideology?
I think it depends on how the non-Trump Republicans see it, right? I think because I feel like the majority of the Republican Party at this point has started to shift away from Trump, and the voter base has started to shift away from Trump. And sure, Trump does have a very, very loyal voter base to some degree. And I think the entire point of like Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz doing that is because they want to capture that voter base. But I still think that there's no point in doing that because you're already going to get their votes if you're a Republican, right? Might as well just shift a little bit away from Trump and try to condemn him, or not just fully like outright condemn him, just say what he's doing is not completely right and just taking a more neutral-ish stance so you don't like completely alienate your ability to get the Trump vote. But I feel like even if you criticize Trump, you're always going to get the Trump vote, like Trump voter base, because you're a Republican. So I see no point in them doing this. And I feel like you're actually like losing your chance of winning the election because more of like the non-Trump Republicans are just going to vote for a third party or just vote for the moderate or Democrat that's probably going to run or something. So, yeah.
So along with the whole like Senate hearings that happened yesterday, they voted to confirm Biden, and obviously there were some objections and there were not and a lot of the Republican, senators, representatives were voting to, allow the vote. And now it's coming out that some Republican higher ups are trying to get Pence to evoke the 25th Amendment. Do you think that this is like a reasonable course of action? Do you think it will happen? What do you think is the deal with the whole 25th Amendment rumors?
I think it's completely. I think it's plausible to an extent, because I think it's just going to cause more of an uproar among his supporters, and they're more likely to do incidents like yesterday again, because now they have another rallying point, and that's another point for Trump to rally around. Because not only can he say that the election was fraudulent, but they're removing me from power unfairly, right? They're removing the person you put in power, just taking it away from me without any reason, right? And I think that's just going to fire up Trump supporters even more. But I completely understand why the Republican establishment is trying to get Pence to do that, because you can even see that McConnell and like Pence are both pretty much tired with Trump, and they just don't want to deal with his BS anymore. Like, you could see it clearly by their speeches that they read to the senators yesterday, and even Chuck Schumer's his speech was pretty good. I kind of liked it, but you can kind of tell how annoyed Pence was, and how not happy McConnell was with what happened. And I don't know how likely it is to happen, but I think that it's probably a possibility. But I think it really depends on what Trump does in the next 2 weeks. If he starts to do all of this again, then I don't think they'll hesitate. But if he calms down a bit, I think they're just going to let it wait out.
Yeah, so kind of going along with that about Trump being very vocal about whether or not he'll quiet down. I know, after he leaves office, there's still a very good chance he is very vocal. He also might run again in 4 years, which is all if he isn't dead, right? So that's another thought. And so, there's a very good chance that for the next 4 years, even though Trump won't be in power, we will be hearing a lot of Trump. So do you think that will have any effect on the country politically or ideologically? Or do you think once he leaves office, he'll just be a crazy man shouting to an empty room?
I think he's already established or done what he wants to do really in office, which is to enhance his personal businesses, gain some sort of political leverage, which he did by becoming the president, and will make more money, which he did as president. Unfortunately, because of COVID, his plan didn't fully work out, and he probably could have taken steps that would have given him more money, which is very weird that he did not think of it as a capitalist there, because he's a pretty big capitalist. But I think that he probably will try to run again, but the Republican establishment is not going to let him run as a Republican. They're just going to stop him, because I know that the Republican establishment and Democratic establishments have done it before. Before we had the 2-term limits, they've stopped individuals from running for a 3rd term. There's no reason why they just can't let Trump put down Republican when he tries to run for a 2nd term.
Interesting take. Well, if there's anything else you would like to add, feel free.
I think it's just going to be interesting how things play out over the next 2 weeks. And if Trump does really do anything bad, then maybe the 25th Amendment is going to be invoked. But it makes you also kind of wonder why. You kind of wish that Mitch McConnell did follow through with the impeachment the first time around, so we could have avoided this whole mess. But yeah, I think that's all I really have to say on that. Sure.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us. It's been awesome having you back.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, for sure. It's been an honor coming on the podcast again, and I hope everything worked out for you guys.
All right, ready?
It's already recording.
Oh fuck! I wasn't recording.
Oh.
So we have another fantastic guest joining us. You may recognize her from a previous episode. She's back and better than ever. Would you like to introduce yourself again?
Hello. It's Marcelina back again. Um, yeah, just but from home this time, not from.
It's a different you then.
It's a completely different Marcelina.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate this, especially now that you're not at college, taking the time off to be here. And yeah, we just like to listen to your thoughts right now.
Yeah, so today has definitely been a really weird day. Started off normal, to be completely honest. I did not know that like January 6th was even the day that they confirmed the electoral votes or any. Like I did not know that was happening today. And then I went to work and I worked from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. and I was not on my phone like at all during that time. And then when I got out, all of a sudden on my like scrolling through social media, I saw all these crazy like videos and posts of people like in the Capitol rioting, and it was like crazy, and it was just barely developing then, and not that much was out there, and I was had other commitments. So I couldn't even spend that much time like looking into it, and just like very shocked. And I didn't really know the scope of it, but it was very like very odd feeling. Um, and then once I got time to like sit down and do more research on it and saw the videos of people in there and what was really happening, it felt very, very surreal and terrifying as someone who does not agree with any of the things that are happening or those people's views. Who's actually quite against it, thinking about, wow, this is like, it felt like it was out of a movie. Like if this has not been a simulation before, like someone really said, let's pull a prank now on the US. And the thing that got to me is I'm just at home, like I'm not really I'm going to work in home. I don't see anybody else in person right now. And my family does not keep up with the news. They don't read anything. They don't watch the news. They don't care to hear about it. And I had nobody to go and be like, the world is end, like the Capitol was rioted in and crashed into, like this is bad. Like I told my mom and she was like, nah, you're lying. Well, hold up. But then like I explained it and like we had a whole conversation. It actually went very well. Like we talked for a long time about it and I told her about it and it was good. But it was definitely very weird and I'm still feeling very weird. And I have been watching a lot of TikToks about it, which is not necessarily the best source of information, but there is a lot of people. It is a source, and there's a few people I've seen who are either living in DC, like showing videos of what was happening, like outside their balconies, or were people who just went down who were not part of the riots, but decided to go down and see like what was happening and some more first person like point of views from inside of it. And yeah, it's kind of been a pile of poop like happening in my brain of like what is going on and I can't process it. And as somebody who's not constantly keeping track of what's happening in the world, like I don't read the news every day, like as much as I would love to be informed, like I just don't do it. And I know that's a fault and I should be more informed, but I try my best to like keep up with the big events and this is definitely it. And I have been refreshing the CNN page about every 5 minutes of what's currently happening with confirming the votes and who's objecting and what they're saying and different plans about the 25th Amendment. And I think, and if they're deciding to try and use that and it's going a little crazy and I don't really know how to feel. or process it, because I haven't like really been able to have a discussion about it with anybody yet.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot, and that's what we're here for, is to have that discussion and to be able to help you process it. Um, Talking about like you wanting to be informed and you keeping up with big dates, I'm remembering a school project that I did my freshman year in high school. Take it way back, where I had to interview my mom about how she felt about 9/11 and when that happened, what was running through her mind, all that jazz, like lead up, what how she found out, stuff like that. And the aftermath for her was to basically be to start being informed. Like beforehand, she like didn't really watch the news or anything like that. She just kind of just like heard about the big events, as you say. And then after this happened, she took it upon herself to be like, you know what? I feel like I need to be up to date with everything, so I know if something bad is happening, I could be aware of these things, uh, stuff like that. So that was her inciting incident. I'm wondering if this could be like an inciting incident for you to like maybe follow the news a little
Right.
bit more.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate because at this point, like, it's terrifying. Like, I think I mostly just didn't read it because at a certain point, it's just too much and it's too, like, scary to know what's happening. Like, it's better to be in bliss of ignorance at it, like, but then I wish I knew, like, what was coming out. It's funny you mentioned talking about 9/11 because one of the TikToks I saw was like, make sure you remember exactly what you did today because one day your grandkids are going to be calling you to ask where you were on January 6th. And I was like, oh, haha, that's kind of terrifying that we're living like through a DDQ and like future school project type of
We're,
large scale event.
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, I feel like the entirety of the last 4 years are going to be like studied for years to come about, President Trump. But yeah, about kind of talking about, again, processing what's been going on. I kind of want to talk about kind of your first reaction, like emotionally speaking. Were you scared? I know it was happening far away. Did fear ever register? Was it more just like surprise? Was it fear for the future of our country?
right. I think it was definitely like I was all over the place, but there was a lot of fear for the country as a whole because I definitely have a feeling that it could have gone a lot further and worse than that potentially, and it still possibly could at a certain point, like depending on where they want to take it. And that's really scary because I definitely don't want to live through like a civil war revolution with like them leading the charge. Like that's not something that's terrifying and super scary. And it was definitely further away, so it didn't feel as scary. Like I didn't think someone was gonna come like banging at my door, but where I live and people who I went to high school with and hung around with for a while in the past, like were huge, huge Trump supporters, like flags on the back of their trucks, and like that's basically why I stopped being friends with them. And I was waiting for texts all day, being like word, like taking over, like whatever, like stuff like that. And as I was driving, like you don't see that many cops around where I live, like every once in a while, obviously, but they're not common. And on my 20-minute drive somewhere today, I probably passed around 10 cops, like, and sheriffs. There's a huge increase of them, which I don't know if it was correlated, but it definitely made me feel like it was. Um, and I really like a big goal of mine was to inform like my mom about it since she does not view the news. I was like, ooh, she probably know this is happening. So I turned into like me learning as much as I can to help them understand more what's happening.
And to touch upon like all of this, not being informed. Um, I have a feeling, or I just have like I've had this thought for a while, is that the media doesn't do a good job of portraying certain events. I feel like if something good in the world happens, I don't feel like the media does a good job of portraying that in the light that they should, give it enough attention as they should. And when something bad happens, I think they kind of downplay it and don't say like how bad it really is. Sometimes they'll say like some bad things, but there are also points where they're just like saying, like it, whatever. Like I probably refer to this incident differently than some news anchors refer to it, and differently than other people, of course. I I think it is what it is, but all this like misinformation that could be thrown around could lead to this type of ignorance per se, to where more of these events start to become a natural like occurrence. Like, do you think that after this, like there will be more things like it in the future, in like the days to come, weeks to come, or do you think this was just like a one-time thing?
Yeah, I have a feeling this is going to carry on a good amount already. Like an hour ago, I started reading about different state capitals starting to be like have protests in front of them and whatever, different MAGA people out there. And I think after seeing how easily these people kind of got away with it, most of them, like there was really not that many people detained. They were barely even detained, like compared to other things of like a lesser caliber happened to people. And I think if anything, this boosted like those people's confidence in being able to do things like this. And I will not be surprised if within the next week or two, a lot of these events start happening, not on a smaller scale all around the country, like not only at state capitals, but other government buildings and just random buildings in general. Um, People just thinking they can start getting away with this all the time. And that's concerning on a whole nother level of people do not wear masks. And the more they keep doing this, I think it's going to create a huge problem for us very quickly. Yeah, definitely is probably portrayed a little less than the outcome of it's probably going to end up being.
Eli, is there anything else that you would like to ask?
Yeah, I'll ask one more question. So yeah, kind of talking about, like you said, how kind of your initial reaction was all over the place and fear and your kind of quest for, I don't know if you want to call it a quest, but like, your new motivation to start and learn. What has that been like, right? Because I know the process of learning, especially now, kind of like what Jack said, with all of these media sources kind of portraying it in different lights, how has this experience kind of been for you?
Right, it's very overwhelming. I have been sticking to like two sources, so I don't really am in favor of any large media like news source. Like none of them are great, but there's some that are better than others. And what I've been sticking to tonight has been CNN. They have live updates of things happening, and I also was watching part of the live stream of what was happening like on the House floor, I think, and been keeping up with that a good amount. And then there's one independent news guy I watch on TikTok, Marcus, who I know sounds bad, but he like bachelor's in like journalism, and he has been following Trump exclusively on his campaign like from the beginning, and has only been reporting on him. Like he's not affiliated with anybody else, and he like went out and was standing and like just reporting on the riots and was in there and taking like videos of it and informing like on time like what was happening. And it's been weird because I don't know what a lot of the words mean, and they're very new to me, and the processes that are happening and talking about different routes to take. And I didn't even know that some of these officials who have been resigning existed, and other things like that. So it's a lot, but it feels good. I mean, this is definitely a weird time to jump into the news world because there's so much happening, and it's
Yeah.
all so fast. Like things are changing by the minute. But it's entertaining. I mean, I couldn't stop looking at the CNN website while watching Survivor, so that was fun.
Yeah, we know how entertaining Survivor can be.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. Again, we really enjoyed having you on and for you to express your thoughts and feelings over what has been happening in our world.
Yeah. It was really great to be back. It's a fun time.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Well, we got another great guest joining us. You might recognize him from a previous episode. Would you like to reintroduce yourself?
I'm Donovan, and despite the longer hair, I am the same person. My 4-year-old nephew had some trouble with that. But yeah, that's who I am.
Oh, recently me and Donovan have struck up a relationship because, us fantasy winners, we make a pretty legit power couple.
Yeah, and it just doesn't work, like, because if you're with someone who's not also a fantasy powerhouse, they're going to be jealous. The relationship's not going to work, but we just understand each other.
Exactly.
Okay, well, if you can quit bragging about all the money you took from me for just a second.
Wait, I didn't get money for beating you in fantasy. This seems unfair.
I did.
I'm taking my anger out on the both of you. So yes, you beat me. I'm glad we established that. Now, Donovan, we love listening to you talk. Do you have anything to say?
Just in general.
Yeah, just in general. I mean, I know you kind of sent, you kind of were talking earlier or texting earlier about kind of the state of our democracy and also about the state of, social media and
Yeah.
how it's been playing out.
So I guess I like a lot of people have talked about this, how like social media is really good at creating silos because the algorithms based on what you've clicked on before like to send you more sensationalist and more, stuff that will make you angry and make you share it. And I don't think it creates this trend in human behavior, but it certainly accelerates it where people sort of create their own alternate realities. And like having all this technology is great because like people can make random podcasts or tell stories that, when only one dominant source of media, stories, just a lot of stories are being ignored and other stories can be told. But a lot of like complete bullshit can also be said and made to look really realistic. And so people just create these separate realities, and like there's a large portion of the population where nothing I say or nothing anyone says will convince them because they have all of this content, this entire ecosystem of stuff they've learned. And like any of the actual issues that affect people in the real world, like poverty or crime or climate change and stuff, I don't think we as a country or like a species can actually address those effectively if we don't find a way to break down, like if you don't find a way to create consensus verified facts. Because whether or not a policy is succeeding or whether or not there's a problem to be solved, like you can't solve a problem if you're not agreeing it's there. And so like I don't necessarily have a solution, but I think that is the central problem that needs to be solved.
Yeah, going off like the whole social media thing, like yes, there are a lot of different viewpoints and they're allowed this portrayal. But I think that's a conversation that's especially like prominent right now since Trump just got banned from Twitter, got permanently suspended. So like is it more of an issue where just like people need to stop? You think that people need to stop spreading lies? And like we need to cut down on misinformation like this instance of Twitter suspending? Like does there need to be more censorship? Or is it more of just like people need to be more educated?
I mean, that's like the tough part, right? Because there are, trolls and, intentional disinformation campaigns, but for the most part, a lot of people like believe what they're sharing or posting. Like that's why they're saying it. And like I want to say like I can be an arbiter of truth and tell you what's incorrect, but like they won't trust me on that. So I think like I would like to see platforms do more fact checking and stuff, but that only works if you get a large enough body of people who are willing to accept that the fact checkers are like fair arbiters of fact.
Yeah, I think you bring up kind of a good point, and there is something to be said for like, on the one hand, we definitely need some sort of team that is, ensuring that there is some validity to everyone who's trying to share, facts, right? But at the same time, do we really want, Twitter to be the decider of what is or is not a fact, or right, or what is or is not real? And right, like, do we really want to give Twitter the sole responsibility of censorship? So I think it is a difficult question because we want to balance, regulation with also personal responsibility. And that's something that's like incredibly difficult because personal responsibility is not something that Americans seem to be typically, capable of. Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's really tough.
That's like so for before Twitter, suspended and then has now banned Trump. What they were doing was the little info box, like this contains information that others have disputed or that has no evidence or something, and would link you to other things to read. And I like that seems to me like that's a pretty good solution. They're not like completely hiding it and they're just trying to move the discussion to a more factual place. But they've been doing that for like 2 or 3 months, and this has still culminated in people storming the Capitol and like in that same Twitter ecosystem where a lot of these plans like things were posted. And if one platform, Twitter, does then say, okay, well, information's not working, we're going to ban it, we'll just move to other platforms. And so I guess to go back to Jack's original question about like people needing to be better educated, like I think we as a society need to be like, I think it actually does start with schools in a lot of ways. And
Are you saying that schools should teach people how to use social media?
well, not well, yes and no, but I think schools need to make sure that people are getting more adequate like critical thinking skills in general, because a lot of the same skills that apply to thinking about, does this make sense, are there multiple sources saying this, does the outlet I'm reading like have a particular bias, are the sort of things like they try to teach you in DBQs and AP classes. And a lot of time like people, in a lot of classes, the classic question that people ask teachers is like, when am I going to need to know this? And like sometimes the teachers have like, well, here's a job where you might need to know this equation, or like here's an inspirational thing about knowledge is power. But like sometimes some teachers are just like, I don't know, there you probably don't, and I think that misses the point sometimes. And like we all went to the same school, which at a pretty high rate of funding per student, and so I think we had more exposure to those sorts of things. But as a country, we've been defunding education at all levels for like 50 years.
So I know that you were kind of saying earlier about how kind of you were saying the central problem is our inability as a society to collectively say like whether or not this is a fact. Do you think that our ability to our trust in institutions as a whole affects that, like the trust we have in the institution of government or the institution, right, or social media companies? Do you think that has anything to play with our ability to come to a consensus on what is a fact.
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of a core tenet of American thought to be skeptical of the government in a lot of ways. And yeah, I think it's interesting how sometimes like our ideological labels get kind of messy in that people who are, this is a little bit of a tangent, but people who are the most anti-government are often the most pro-police, despite them being like one of the most tangible forms of government force. And then a lot of people who are very much anti-corporations are, and like large concentrations of power are telling Facebook and Twitter to like use their economic platform to, influence behavior by demonetizing people. And then another example is like Republicans freak out whenever Twitter bans someone, even though like they're a corporation. They have, if they think it's better for them to ban someone, the typical Republican thought is to do that. And so like I think Americans across the political spectrum are very skeptical of most things that could present them a fact.
So yeah, I agree that it's kind of like, it's kind of all about convenience, where, you just like, if something works in your like benefit, you're gonna agree with it more likely, and if something works against it, you're gonna disagree with it, which is why you see like some of these kind of like, more ironic like issues, like with, people being pro-police but anti-government. It's just kind of, it's interesting to see, because it's also, I mean, we're seeing it real time, where it's like, it was convenient for like these people who, who rioted on the Capitol and broke in. It was like convenient for them earlier to be like, oh yeah, blue lives matter, but then they just like disregard what the police have to say. So I mean, it's really impossible to address, because it's just, I think it's an ideology that like all humans have, is to just, whatever you believe, like it's just kind of working to your, I don't know how I want to say this, but it's really like, ultimately I feel like politics these days is all about convenience, where like you're just gonna side with the ideology or theory or belief that like works to your advantage, especially from politicians' standpoint. It's like, that's how like they get reelected, and that's how like they can advance into higher positions, is just by like working their way up the system by doing what's most convenient to them, which is a real issue if you think about it, because like there's not really a certain set of standards that we like are that they're all abiding by. So it's like kind of hard to like really trust what your politicians are saying to you,
Especially if your senator is Josh Hawley.
especially if your senator
Especially if your
is Josh Hawley.
senator is Josh Hawley.
You bring up, Donovan, you bring up some very good points. This was a great conversation. Enjoyed having you back on. It's a real hoot.
Yes, thank you.
I just regret not having a Photoshop bodybuilder as my background.
Don't we all?
Oh no. So we have another fantastic guest joining us. Hasn't been on the podcast before, so he's a fresh face. Alan, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name is Alan Yu, and I am a sophomore at Ladue High School. I do debate, and I play the French horn, and that's kind of like the most interesting part about me, I guess. I'm really passionate about those things, and I continue to do them because of that.
Great.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so do you want to talk about maybe how you're feeling right now, your thoughts on everything that's going on?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of like something I take away from the things like I write in my like journal, I guess. I kind of keep a little diary. And so I guess something that I've thought about this year was sort of, you know, sort of losing touch with everything. I feel like this is kind of like a little bit of a outdated concept, but we kind of all live in our own little bubble. And now more than ever, I feel like, we're encased in our own homes, in the protection behind our own doors, and like we're kind of free to think, feel as we please. But then again, it's like sometimes pretty harmful to not be able to interact with the people you want to in order to get out of that comfort zone, get out of that bubble. Uh, and I think 2020 is kind of like the culmination of that idea where we kind of and yeah, like I feel like I kind of a lot has changed around me, like COVID-19 and all, but also family stuff, like financial situations, and I feel like now more than ever I kind of lost control of my life. Like I'm really not in the front seat anymore. Like I'm sort of taking life from the back seat, and just like going to virtual school and like entering the classroom just like through a link, and like not really going anywhere, and just like reading about the news from like a computer screen instead of witnessing a lot of things on my own, which is kind of something that I never really kind of got to experience in the past, because my life I've spent a lot of times outdoors, and I spent a lot of time with my friends, and that kind of thing has thrown me off a little bit, the trajectory of how I thought my life was going to go in 2020.
Yeah, this last year has definitely, thrown a wrench into a lot of people's lives and has kind of changed the way we think and we feel. I think 2020 was a rough year for I'm going to be honest, for probably everyone in some way or another. It was just really rough. So like I totally understand like what you're saying. It's just like you've kind of taken that back seat and you're not like dictating like what you get to do.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm wondering that uh now that 2021 has started, do you think that some of this like feeling towards like this past year and like you kind of like annoyance that you're just cooped up in your house and you want to be outside, is this going to change how people are going to act in a sense? Like, are they going to be more rambunctious, especially once the vaccine comes rolling in, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the things that are causing people to stay indoors are also people just being outdoors. And so I think, like, for example, I've decided to go back to school for this semester to kind of like alleviate those types of feelings of, loneliness and like staying shelled in your house. And especially as this vaccine starts to come out and people are starting to kind of get over that like COVID depression stage. Uh, and like people start feeling a little bit more hopeful about the future, I think people will decide to, be a little more free with their actions. But there's still the major consequence of like COVID-19 has kind of exposed how Americans kind of are weak, like, or not weak, but like kind of ignorant to everything sometimes, especially people going outside and still trying to enjoy their lives, which is in some ways understandable, but in some ways is also kind of despicable in that you're affecting other people's lives. Um, and there's this sort of like massive individualism where it's like my action like individually doesn't really make a big dent in everyday society, but I think uh, this COVID pandemic will definitely change that idea of like my individual action has no effect on the overall population.
I do think, before I'll let you go, Eli, I would like to say, to go along with that ignorance and that individualism, especially the actions that happened today, I mean, that definitely played a part in everything that, kind of went down, from the Senate hearings to the riots and the attack on the Capitol. So I just thought what you said was, very like
current, even though it's to deal with issues that we've been going around for like since 2020. That this is kind of an extension of how people are feeling. Eli, I'll let you go now. Sorry.
Yeah, I want to thank you for talking about how you personally feel, and kind of want to ask, how has, quarantine or, virtual school or any aspect of what's been going on the past year affected your view on your future, on life as a whole, on reality, and if so, in what way?
Well, I guess I have to take a sort of outside lens about my own future, considering like how other people have been affected by the pandemic. Like I'm like greatly thankful that I'm a sophomore and not like a junior or senior that has to like write college apps or like determine what they want to do in the future in this COVID pandemic, which is ultimately 100 times harder than what I'm dealing with right now. And like even though there's been COVID, like looking at it from an outside aspect, I've been like grateful and pretty hopeful of like what I can do, because I haven't really lost much in the pandemic as compared to a lot of other people. And so, my ideas about my own future are like, uh, I want to do X thing. Uh, and, junior and senior year, I'm really hoping that COVID-19 will be gone and not stand in my way of doing those things. But current juniors, seniors, even like college, uh, freshmen, senior through seniors, like you guys are experiencing the tides of like, COVID has been a barrier to opportunity, which has kind of not really been the same for me. And that's kind of how I think about my future. And I'm pretty grateful for that fact.
I definitely admire all the hope that you have about everything that has happened in recent times. Like I think it's very commendable, and like not a lot of people have that right now, especially after such a horrible year. Um, so that's awesome to hear that somebody is feeling optimistic in this time, and that you can take something good out of such a bad situation.
Yeah, I think it's like this idea of like, why not kind of thing. I remember there's this thing like I read about a while ago where it's like, it's sort of like out there, but it's like, should you believe in God, or like should you believe in a higher being? And it's like the sort of theory goes is like, why not believe in God, right? If you can achieve some kind of like divine, like divine blessing, like why not? And it's, even though that's like not the best example, it's kind of sort of the lens I've taken now is like, why not believe in something hopeful? Why not, like, why should I be pessimistic, make myself feel a little bit worse about the current times when I can be optimistic, and make myself feel a bit better, than if I didn't believe.
Well, if there's anything else you would like to add, we'd welcome to hear it. We really enjoyed having you on.
Sure, I guess like a few little shout outs. I mean, thank you to Eli and Jack for making this podcast, for providing a sort of medium in which I can communicate, my words, my actual voice, to a crowd, which is something I've not been able to do. Sometimes I write, text, and that's how I communicate. That's actually most of what I do nowadays, because we barely get to speak to each other. Um, and that sort of outlet for my voice is something I value as important. Uh, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, we really appreciate you taking the time to express yourself.
All right, thanks, man.
Thank
I
you.
gotta get back to math homework now. So,
Oh no.
All right.
all
Sounds
right,
good.
I'll see you guys later.
See ya.
All right. Bye. So we wanted to thank you all so much. We really enjoyed making this episode. We had a lot of fun, but also we had it was very introspective for us. We were able to learn a lot, and we think that's very very important for the news community.
Yeah, I think what this kind of episode helped continue to show us is that we need to continue to have these conversations with each other, not just through the podcast. And I'm not just talking about me, but humanity as a whole, because we need to continue to communicate with each other, express opinions in a thoughtful manner to where we can all benefit, we can all exchange viewpoints, context, all that good stuff, because it's important for us to develop new understandings about certain situations. You're not just so close-minded. Additionally, keep spreading this this hopefulness. I think that's kind of important thing that was shown throughout, is that if there's something humanity needs right now, it's hope. And there's only one way to spread hope, is that just to talk about it and be as hopeful as you can be.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you again for listening. We will have an episode out next week, most likely. And thank you for stopping by.
Thank you very much.